Book 2, and welcome back to the library tour of Doom. This is a tour through every book in my library that I have ever owned, that I currently own, that I have in my journals, maybe even that I imagine. Book by book, one book a day, forever, until we're all old and gray. And today's book comes from 2012, almost 10 years ago. And yet, it is not going to sound that way. It is mandatory reading now for everyone in the world. This is by the great naturalist David Quammen, who I have praised on this channel many times before, and this is his book Spillover. And I want to read you the dust jacket copy, and then I'll read you an excerpt from the book, just so you know what page we're on. This is the dust jacket copy of a book written 10 years ago. The next big and murderous human pandemic, the one that kills us in millions, will be caused by a new disease, new to humans anyway. The bug that's responsible will be strange, unfamiliar, but it won't come from outer space. Odds are that the killer pathogen, most likely a virus, will spill over into humans from a non-human animal. David Quammen's Spillover is a masterpiece of science reporting that tracks this subject around the world. For 5 years, Quammen shadowed scientists into the field, a rooftop in Bangladesh, a forest in the Congo, a Chinese rat farm, a suburban woodland in the Dutchess County, New York, and through their high biosecurity laboratories. He interviews survivors and gathers stories of the dead. He found surprises in the latest research, alarm among public health officials, and deep concern in the eyes of researchers. And this book delivers the science, the history, and the mystery of the human anguish as page-turning drama. From what innocent creature in what remote landscape will the next big one, capital B, capital O, emerge? A rodent in southern China? A monkey in West Africa? A bat in Malaysia that happens to roost above a pig farm from which hogs are exported to Singapore? In this age of speedy travel between dense human populations and an emerging disease that can go global in hours, but where and how will it start? And he talks about the Marburg virus, SARS, Ebola. He talks about all kinds of things in here. Those of you who know this author will know already, he's a terrific writer. In addition to being a science popularizer of long standing, in addition to being a tough cookie when it comes to assessing his sources, he's also just fantastic to read on the page. And has been from the very beginning. He was writing columns and essays and whatnot that were collected in a couple of his first books. Natural Acts was one of them that is just tremendous stuff. Well worth your time to find no matter what it is. I think the book of his that I see most often in used bookstores is The Song of the Dodo. But any of his books are worth it, well worth your time. And I want to read you just the beginning of one section here, to give you a taste of his prose and also, frankly, to give you chills, because we're all living in the world that this book so confidently predicted. Infectious disease is all around us. Infectious disease is a kind of natural mortar binding one creature to another, one species to another, within the elaborate biophysical edifices we call ecosystems. It's one of the basic processes that ecologists study, including also predation, competition, decomposition, and photosynthesis. Predators are relatively big beasts that eat their prey from outside. Pathogens, disease-causing agents such as viruses, are relatively small beasts that eat their prey from within. Although infectious disease can seem grisly and dreadful, under ordinary conditions it's every bit as natural as what lions do to wildebeests or zebras, or what owls do to mice. But conditions aren't always ordinary. Just as predators have their accustomed prey, their favored targets, so do pathogens. Just as a lion might occasionally depart from its normal behavior, kill a cow instead of a wildebeest, a human instead of a zebra, so can a pathogen shift to a new target. Accidents happen. Aberrations occur. Circumstances change, and with them, exigencies and opportunities change too. When a pathogen leaps from some non-human animal into a person and succeeds there in establishing itself as an infectious presence, sometimes causing illness or death, we call this zoonosis. It's a mildly technical term, zoonosis, unfamiliar to most people, but it helps to clarify the biological complexities behind the ominous headlines about swine flu, bird flu, SARS, emerging diseases in general, and the threat of a global pandemic. It helps us to comprehend why medical science and public health campaigns have been able to conquer some horrific diseases, such as smallpox and polio, but unable to conquer other horrific diseases, such as dengue or yellow fever. It says something essential about the origins of AIDS. It's a word of the future, destined for heavy use in the 21st century. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And the book does a fantastic job of examining not only headline-grabbing cases of zoonosis in the past, but also why there is that psychological difference in humans between some kinds of these pathogens and others. Why some get fast-tracked for extermination campaigns and others just get dithered about. It's a big book, but it's a great one. Absolutely fantastic. And it's therefore your library tour of doom for today is a strong recommend. Of course, the one element that's missing in that description, now that I think about it, does this book have an index? It does. It has an index, and the word Wuhan is not in that index. But the one complication that isn't in that prose, that fantastic prose about where these things come from, is the human element. Not the psychology of distinguishing between some pathogens that we think don't come from wild animals and some that we think do, but what happens if humans decide to isolate a pathogen that they have found in another species and work on it? Put it under evolutionary pressures in a laboratory designed to eliminate some aspects, enhance others. In biological circles, that is known as gain-of-function research. Again, let's check the index, but this is written in more innocent days, so that gain-of-function research might also not have its own entry. It does not. That has become a thing to do. And let's ascribe the best possible motives to it. Let's say the reason why biochemists, whatnot, do that is in order to raise awareness, in order to protect ourselves with knowledge. The more you know about a virus, the more able you will be to deal with it if you encounter it, if it transmits from that original non-human host to humanity. Let's be generous and say that something along those lines is the justification that human researchers use for doing what would otherwise be completely incomprehensible. Why on earth would you devote all day long, every day of your working life to making a deadly virus more deadly? Why on earth would you do that? If you did that, you might rationalize it by saying, okay, well, the justification that's allowing me to sleep at night and look at my kids in the morning, is the more we know about the original natural pathogen, the better equipped we will be to deal with it if it reaches the human population. I might point out that justification has never, in fact, turned out to be true. When these zoonotic viruses do reach the human population is never ready. Never. And that's just with natural jumps. Gain-of-function research means that the thing that might eventually reach the human population won't be natural at all. It won't be the same thing that was found in a bat or a pangolin or an ape. It'll be something different. It'll be something a little bit refined. And as the reason I bring it up is because the one element that this book doesn't really deal with in any great detail is that kind of human tinkering. And more, the more facts come out, the more it becomes at least a subject of discussion as to whether or not the thing this book predicted, the next big one, capital B, capital O, the COVID-19 pandemic, was tinkered with by humans in a lab. Is that one of its origin stories? At the beginning of this whole story, the people who put that forward online a year ago, I remember seeing in last April, I remember seeing YouTube channels say, isn't it a little strange that Wuhan is the only city within 100 miles that has an advanced virology lab? Yes, it has a wet market where all kinds of exotic animals are sold to the public, either alive or freshly dead. And yes, there are no safeguards on that wet market. And yes, that means that's a good vector for the transmission of a zoonotic virus. But there's also an advanced virology lab right there in town. And maybe some of those people go to that wet lab or take the subway or walk around breathing or whatever. Back in last April or March, people said that looks like more than a coincidence, were called racist. They were called Chinese-hating racists and crackpots. And a lot of their content was banned. Just completely censored by the modern-day censors that we have given power over everything we say and do. Until public figures started mentioning it. Joe Biden. So if a public figure, a powerful public figure, just offhand mentions, oh yeah, and we should look into that as well, then you can't censor it anymore. Then all of a sudden it's not for crackpots. Only for crackpots. And so now people can bring it up and can examine whether or not there was some sort of protocol breach at that virology institute in Wuhan. Some sort of protocol breach. And as horrific as it is, considering that we're talking about millions of people dead, a gigantic hammer blow to the world economy, hundreds of thousands of jobs lost, considering that we're talking about, in other words, real damage, I should point out that an inadvertent protocol breach at the Wuhan Institute of Virology is the best case scenario there. The worst case scenario is something intentional. That this all happened to all of us intentionally. One way or another, we know where it came from. Humans didn't create COVID-19. They might have refined it. They might have, I don't want to use the explosive term weaponized, but they may have refined it. They may have fiddled and tinkered with it. But one way or another, whether they did that or not, they didn't invent it. It came from the natural world. And that's what this book is all about. So if this book is at your library, it probably has a long waiting list even now. I think it had a little boom in 2020, and it deserves it, not only because it was incredibly prescient, and prescient in the way that the best prescience always happens, which is just knowing the past, but also because I'm hoping that it introduces a lot of people to this author who's really good. He's not always doomsaying. He's had a couple of doomsaying books, well warranted, considering what the state of the natural world is like, but he's also terrific. He's well worth reading. No matter what he wrote, he's well worth reading. So I'm hoping that maybe if this book had a little bump in 2020, at least one positive side effect of that bump was to introduce people to this author. That would be great. And now I've done my part by introducing you to this author. This is David Quammen. I've praised him many times before on this channel. And this is his book, Spillover. And I say, that is a very angry mandrill on the cover, but of course it could have been just a very frightened bat. One way or another, that is your library tour of doom for today. I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.